Ingersoll and GM saying basically that these U.S. tariffs on auto workers are unjustified and unjustifiable. And meanwhile, we will make sure, like we did in the 80s when auto plants from American car companies were being closed, we embrace the Japanese automakers. We'll do that, and we will endorse those who build EVs.
This was not a normal day in Canada's House of Commons. What unfolded was a moment that cracked open years of political double standards. Live, unfiltered, and impossible to ignore. Canadians didn't just witness a debate. They witnessed a confrontation that forced one question into the spotlight. Who are our politicians really willing to challenge? And who do they quietly protect? Mélanie Joly wasn't there to recite talking points. She wasn't there to defend a spreadsheet. She was there to expose a pattern, one that had gone unspoken for far too long. The Conservatives opened with a familiar narrative. They claimed Canada's electric vehicle subsidies were betraying Canadian workers and quietly helping the United States. On the surface, it sounded like economic nationalism. But something crucial was missing. A silence so loud, it demanded attention. Not once did they confront the real source of instability in the auto sector. Not once did they name the tariffs reshaping the industry. And not once did they challenge Donald Trump's trade war. Instead, every ounce of blame was aimed inward, straight at Ottawa. Joly saw it immediately, and she refused to let it slide. Just days earlier, the Liberal government had announced a $2.3 billion electric vehicle incentive program. The goal was clear: strengthen Canada's auto sector while preparing for an electrified future. But Conservatives reframed it as a betrayal, arguing that US-made vehicles could also qualify. They demanded a simple answer. Would the government block American access to the subsidy? Yes or no? It was a moment designed to corner the government. But Joly didn't retreat. She responded by widening the lens. She explained that the auto strategy had two objectives. First, to support companies that invest, build, and produce vehicles in Canada. Second, to prepare for where the industry is heading, toward electrification, innovation, and long-term competitiveness. Then came the part no one could ignore. This strategy wasn't backed by one political party. It was supported by provincial leaders, labor unions, manufacturers, environmental groups, and consumer advocates. In fact, nearly everyone agreed, except the Conservatives. And that raised an uncomfortable question. Why oppose a plan supported by workers, industry, and provinces, while remaining silent on the tariffs, costing those same workers their jobs? That's when the tone shifted. Conservatives escalated their attacks. They blamed Ottawa for layoffs. They blamed Canadian policy for American decisions. They blamed domestic leadership for foreign protectionism. But again, the criticism stopped at the border. No challenge to Washington. No condemnation of U.S. tariffs. No direct mention of the policies squeezing Canadian auto workers. That silence wasn't accidental. Attacking your own government is politically safe. Confronting a hostile foreign administration takes something else entirely. Joly leaned into that contrast. She pointed out what hadn't been said. Why were Conservatives unwilling to publicly oppose U.S. tariffs harming Canadian auto workers? Why were they quiet about job losses in places like Brampton and Ingersoll? And why was the outrage always directed inward, never outward? She reminded the House that Canada has faced moments like this before. In the 1980s, when American automakers pulled back, Canada adapted. The country welcomed new partners, new investments, and new industries. And now, history was repeating itself. Instead of clinging to the past, the government was positioning Canada for the future, supporting electric vehicle manufacturing, rewarding companies that build here, and protecting workers through diversification. By the final exchange, the debate had transformed. This was no longer about subsidies. It was about credibility, about courage, about who was willing to confront economic aggression and who preferred safer targets at home. Then came the line that landed like a closing argument. The happiest person in North America when this EV plan was announced, Joly said, was not a Canadian worker. It was Donald J. Trump. And suddenly, the silence made sense. This wasn't just a clash of policies. It was a test of political nerve. Because when jobs are on the line, the question isn't who you criticize the loudest. It's who you're willing to stand up to when it actually matters. Then the accusation escalated. The claim was no longer subtle. Conservatives argued that Donald Trump had openly stated his goal to pull Canadian auto jobs south of the border, and that under Liberal leadership he was succeeding. They cited job losses, thousands of workers displaced, a Brampton plant once expected to build the Jeep Compass, now operating in the United States instead. The charge was direct and emotionally loaded. Canadian tax dollars, they argued, should never support American-made vehicles, especially not under an administration they described as economically hostile. The demand followed immediately. Would the minister look Canadian auto workers in the eye and promise that not a single tax dollar would support vehicle production in Trump's America? The response was firm. On this side of the House, Joly said, defending workers isn't a slogan, it's a responsibility. And that responsibility is exactly what the auto strategy was built to fulfill. The plan, she explained, is about protecting and expanding auto production inside Canada. It's about attracting investment from global partners, Korean, German, Chinese manufacturers, companies willing to build, hire, and grow here. And it's about refusing to let Canada's industrial base slowly drift south, plant by plant, job by job. This wasn't retreat. It was resistance. But the exchange exposed something deeper. After repeated attacks, conservatives still could not answer one core question. Why had they never directly confronted American tariffs? Why the silence when Canadian workers were targeted by Washington's trade policy? At that moment, Joly shifted from critique to evidence. She laid out the response in concrete terms. Counter-tariffs imposed, market access restricted, investment conditions enforced, targeted measures designed to protect domestic production. It was a reminder that defending workers requires more than outrage. It requires action. The rhetoric intensified again. One conservative member accused the minister of justifying the transfer of Canadian funds to American electric vehicle production. They described U.S. policy as economic warfare. They accused the government of presiding over the decline of Canada's auto economy. The demand this time was an apology. Joly didn't offer one. Instead, she corrected the record. Canada had not responded to U.S. tariffs with silence. It responded with countermeasures. When production declined, access to the Canadian market was reduced by 50% for one manufacturer, by over 24% for another. The principle, she said, was simple. Canada invests in those who invest in Canada. And Canada protects jobs with policy, not posturing. By the end, it was clear this debate had never been just about electric vehicles. It was about political honesty, about whether defending workers means confronting the real source of economic pressure or redirecting that pressure for domestic advantage. Mélanie Joly made one thing unmistakably clear. You cannot claim to stand with workers while staying silent about unjustified American tariffs. You cannot demand accountability at home while avoiding it abroad. And you cannot build credibility by choosing your targets based on convenience. Today, that contradiction wasn't exposed through slogans. It was exposed through substance. If you value serious, fact-based analysis of Canada's role in global politics, beyond noise, beyond spin, subscribe to HT channel. We focus on power, strategy, and real consequences. Thanks for watching.